was on the email, Mark's bio, which was quite lengthy, because that means we've been on for a while. More importantly, could you please welcome Mark and allow him to get underway.
Thanks, everyone. And this is the second time we've been presenting here, and I believe the title I submitted was Promise, Pitfalls, and Challenges, and I'm going to get to that. So I actually am going to give you two presentations. The first one is the pitch deck I'm just going to scream through, and you can ask me questions on that later. And after that, I'm going to go and talk about the challenges, all the different challenges, which I think are going to be of more interest to you as a group. Of course, anyone who wants to write a check is welcome to write a check, but that's not why you're here. You're here because this is unique and there are challenges. So we are an early mover in a huge market, East Africa, and I think everybody here knows the issues with mercury and artisanal gold miners. I'm wearing this tie today because 25 years ago I was given it by someone from Mintech, which is an outstanding metallurgical firm out of Johannesburg. We were looking at processing electric arc furnace wastes in Manitoba across the Canadian prairies and so on. It turned out they had identified this problem 2 decades prior, had come up with a fabulous sodium-based solution for artisanal gold miners, and they could never get any traction. Why? Because of trust. The end product for the artisanals didn't look like gold. The middlemen weren't interested in it. The whole thing didn't work. They made ties out of the artisanal gold miner's art, and I got a tie. So brilliant research, brilliant metallurgy, and it couldn't get traction for market reasons. So that's an interesting aside. Mercury, I'll just throw in a couple of things about mercury. It's believed that the first emperor of China wanted to live forever, and he asked his physician to mix him an elixir for immortality. And mercury, among the ancients, was associated with immortality. It was this really curious metal, right, when you think about it. They're pretty sure the Egyptians used it in a number of applications. Anyway, we're pretty certain that a good bit of mercury made its way into the elixir for the emperor, who died within weeks of taking this elixir, right? And I believe his tomb is so mercury contaminated they're afraid to open it. Right? So mercury, some very interesting stories about it, about its use, about how people perceived it for so long. We all know the story about the Mad Hatter. And Minamata's disease, first identified by a pretty bright doctor in Japan in the 50s, I believe. The townspeople or the city people were starting to drool. They're getting these neurological issues. And he noticed the cats were also having the same neurological issues, because mercury affects mammals. It doesn't really affect fish to the same degree. And he said, what are the cats doing? Well, the cats were eating the fish. They were hanging out behind the restaurants eating the fish. And it turned out there'd been a new plant put in place in the bay, along the bay, and it was using mercury, and the fish that people had been able to eat for centuries was suddenly causing an issue. So that's how it got to be called Minamata's disease. So this is a huge market. Nobody is really doing this in an organized way in East Africa, and of course we are seeking a strategic investor. We've been making a lot of progress. We have key agreements in place with 2 groups of artisanals. Actually, one of the deals is with 2 groups themselves, and then the large agreement is with 1. We have finally secured land for the processing plant at Muma, and we know where the land will be. We haven't signed the lease, but at Busia we have that in hand. Permitting, we're starting to make progress. We have all the strategic partners we need, except for the funding strategic partner, but in country the right strategic partners, including the Bank of Uganda. Short time frame to production and fabulous economics. Everyone here knows the problem with they now call them ASGMs. They put a G in for the ASM, to artisanal and small scale gold miners. Account for 36% of the world's total mercury emissions. So when you eat that can of tuna, the biggest contributor of mercury to that can of tuna is artisanal and small scale gold mining. Poor recoveries, and they get a poor price. Obviously the solution is mechanized processing. We all know how that works. And our deal with the miners is that we will share the net proceeds equally. Each side gets their respective costs. They're defined in our agreement already, and open book on both parties. Huge net economic impact for the communities from their share after tax, and they will become taxpayers, which they're not really right now. They will become fully integrated into the tax system. So the government loves this because their revenues are going to go through the roof. So essentially, this is a picture of, I believe this is the Mubende United Miners, and they are doing some cyanide leaching there. They're using gravity. They are brick lined, or brick, refractory brick, clay lined. They put people in there with shovels to shovel the material and to stir it up. They get poor recoveries. It's not a great system. Obviously the shovels are damaging the clay lining. Also, they know they need to change, but at least that's better than mercury. Those are our first two project locations. In Busia, the grade is so high that people's homes are on top of the vein. They actually will dig down through their living room to get into the vein. And we have the MoUs with both partner groups and an MoU with Busitema University, which is to provide work-study positions and establish connections with the universities, and we will also link them with Canadian University training as well. So that's part of our solution going forward for training and technical. I mentioned the land, that we are solving that. The Uganda Ministry of Energy and Minerals Development is the formal name. They've been providing introductions to us of the best miners, the best artisanal miners, and to the Bank of Uganda. They were our entry point. One person in particular, Muherwe Tabaro, we got the referral from a Canadian. And the interesting thing is the Communist Party of China has been our best advertising. The artisanals have told Morris and others, bring us someone with technical capability. Do not bring us the Communist Chinese. They're actually explicit about that. They have been so taken advantage of so many times that that's what they're told. That's the message. The Bank of Uganda consulted with us actually, among others, on what their artisanal gold purchase program should look like. The IMF, very concerned about the amount of smuggling of gold in Uganda. They say, well, you're mining so much gold and we know that so much more is coming out of the country. So you've got a problem. So the solution is for them to buy the gold if it is slavery-free, mercury-free, and criminal finance-free, and obeying all the laws. In other words, miners have proper land tenure. They're not currently paying taxes, generally, because that's how these things work in the developing world and with the artisanal gold business. So they are going to pay world price for the gold in doré form. Yeah, isn't that stunning? World price in doré form. Why are they doing this? Well, there are 6 or 7 refineries in Uganda, and when artisanals take the gold to be refined, they always seem to have poor recoveries in the order of 80% recovery. Sorry, don't know where the gold went, right? They will not be able to deal with the Bank of Uganda in that way. The Bank of Uganda will get the recovery that they have, but they will essentially drive everyone into being taxpayers. So the small loss the Bank of Uganda will run by having to refine the gold will have a huge impact on the government tax revenues. And in a similar vein, it will eliminate the criminal finance activity that's going on. So they will start to get a handle on this. Now, obviously, a number of artisanals and other middlemen will continue to smuggle gold out of the country, but this is a very important initiative for them, and the program will run for 3 years. If you produce enough gold, our projects they will pick up your gold at the gold room door with the Ugandan army. So that solves another problem for us as well. The leaders of the MUMA, Mubende United Miners Association, are actually also the leaders of UGASM, which is the single largest umbrella group for artisanals in Uganda. And then I mentioned Busitema University. We're currently raising $300,000 at 15 cents a share. We have 10 million shares outstanding, so that's 1.5 pre-money valuation. And we will need to raise approximately 12 million US to produce 20,000 ounces a year of gold. That's a pretty low capex per ounce of production, and with very short time, payback time, 12 to 18 months is what we're officially saying. It could be at $3,000 an ounce gold, and short time from the build decision to first gold. 7 months in the case of the smaller project, Busia, 12 months in the case of MUMA. And we will get 2/3 of that from the Uganda Development Bank in a 3-year term loan at 11%. This means we'll need to raise, let's call it 8 million Canadian all in by the time we're done. But on the 4.8 million US, on just the total capital, 12 million US, our EBITDA will exceed that by a very substantive amount every year. And after tax, our share at $3,000 an ounce gold exceeds 150% per annum return on capital. So when you consider the 2/3 leverage from the Uganda Development Bank, that puts the rate of return on equity extremely high. And it's very scalable. So Busia will be scalable 50% just by putting on a 3rd shift. There are many other artisanals who will want to join, so there will be potential for expansion at each plant site, potential for a 3rd and 4th site in Uganda. You can't do a common facility in Uganda for 2 reasons. One is semi-annual rainy seasons that create massive flooding, and the second is that you need a permit for every truckload that goes on a highway. And you can imagine what a mess that would be. And all the potential for, we'll call them complications that could arise. And then scaling outside of the country as well. Busia is right on the border with Kenya. Oh, and insiders own 35% of the stock right now. And the advisory board owns some more. And there is one other, this isn't exactly the right picture for it, but legacy tailings, huge potential. They still have lots of gold in them. There are tailings all over the country. So we have multiple ways to scale this from what is already very attractive economically. So why? So now I will go to the other presentation. Come back, mouse. So if it should be so profitable and could scale to being big, why isn't somebody already doing it? And why the challenge to raise the money? Promise, pitfalls, and the challenges. And I should, where's the tab to turn this? Is that okay visually? Yeah? Okay, then I'll keep that. Our disclaimer. So East Africa has huge potential. Artisanals in East Africa may be mining up to 3 million ounces right now. And they're getting recoveries of about 1/3. So the potential is huge. We don't know, nobody really knows how much the artisanals are mining. So where would you go first, and how do you find your way in? That was our first challenge. We actually also looked at Guyana and spent 6 months trying to determine if we could do anything in Guyana, where they have lots of gold, lots of tailings everywhere that still run gold. Unfortunately, many people have gone to hit those tailings with not just with mercury the first pass, but then with cyanide, creating cyanomercuric compounds, which are a real mess to deal with. And there's water everywhere. So we determined someone should do Guyana, and it takes a lot of capital. So it needs to be someone bigger and stronger. So we looked at Tanzania, and we had a couple of very good candidates, but we could never, Tanzania we found difficult in a bunch of ways, and we simply couldn't get the right way in. South Sudan, huge amounts of gold, dead bodies everywhere around the gold business. Some of us, a group of us have backed a couple of entrepreneurs in South Sudan, so we have 10 years experience there. We're not interested in trying to do gold in South Sudan. And we settled on Uganda because we got an excellent referral in from Stephen Barega, who had worked in the country. He runs Romeo's Gold. I think it might be going with a name change right now. And Stephen had these great contacts and referred us to Morris. And the timing turned out to be great because Uganda had just passed legislation banning the use of mercury. Of course, it's still used. So the first challenge, how do you pick one and how do you get in? Now that you've decided, the first big challenge is trust. Others always want their gold. Everyone's always trying to take advantage of the artisanal gold miner, the middlemen, everything, the government. And what's interesting about Morris Maherwe Tabaro, he says call me Morris, is the artisanal gold miners trust him. He warned them in 2016 that he was going to send the military in because of certain of their aspects of their operations, and they didn't believe him. And he was the first one to take the military in. He said, you have to make these changes. He brought the military in, and I sat in the room where they said to Morris, we weren't happy with you 8 years ago. This was 2024, I think, 2023. We weren't happy with you, but you've always told us the truth. So Morris has their trust, not their happiness always, but he has their trust. So trust is very important. Doug met them in late 22, I believe it was. I went back in March of 2023 with Rob Cook, and they said to us, everyone has always said they want to do something and they'd be back, and you're the first ones who have ever come back the second time, right? So trust takes time, and you have to be prepared that they're on a different time cycle. They don't have comfort with the speed at which we are accustomed to doing things because of their experience in dealing with people who come from out of country. There's a lot of resistance to assaying for a couple of reasons. One is confidentiality of information. They're afraid that if someone has assays, they will target. And they're afraid there'll be some money paid to a government official and somehow they will lose their land tenure. So there's a lot of resistance to assaying, and they also don't think it matters much because they mine some rock, and they're typically miners, most of them are no longer alluvial, they're actually mining rock. And what they're concerned about is the recovery they get, not what they're not getting. They're concerned about what they get. So they don't assay in front. And by the way, this means throughout the world, artisanal gold miners' practices mean we're losing data, very valuable data. That might be one of the, when gold was at $2,000 and $2,500 an ounce, that was possibly the most valuable information that we were losing was data. The CCP entities have left a legacy of predatory behavior, and this has also made them very leery of doing deals. Country rules are always different as well. So trust takes time. That was the first big challenge. We think we've overcome the trust issue. Understanding and expectations. Almost no one has experience with capital markets and junior companies in Uganda and in East Africa. Almost none of the ASGMs have actual technical training. And I call it the entrepreneur tribe. If we tell a joke about accountants anywhere in the world, people will get it. They understand who the accounting tribe are. And I spend my life dealing with the entrepreneur tribe, and they are the same all over the world. They are very determined and they are very stubborn, right? So you are dealing with a whole bunch of entrepreneurs. And entrepreneurs who are, if they form an association, because they are a bunch of small individual holdings, if they form an association, they're having to deal with each other. And it's the same over here as well. When you try to put, anytime you try to merge 4 companies together, you get all sorts of issues with the people who lead it, right? So entrepreneurs are very determined, but they're very stubborn. So working through this, and this is one of the challenges we have, frankly, at the smaller group, because they haven't sorted out all of their issues internally. We can see it. They've signed the deal with us, but we know they still have a couple of issues to deal with. The larger one, MUMA, very well organized, they've solved their problem. But Doug's insight was, we can't do a deal with the individual artisanals, we will have a nightmare. We do a deal with the association, and we let the association figure out how to distribute their proceeds. So we're not dealing with a whole bunch of individuals. So that was an important move that Doug decided on. So these are challenges that constantly intervene in everything from legal agreements to how our pacing also has to work. So they don't have, the assumption is you show up, well, you'll have capital, why can't this happen immediately, right? That's sort of their thinking, and then slowly you have to walk them through the fact that first we're going to have to do some bulk sampling, and we're going to have to do some engineering work, and then we're going to have to do, got a lot of steps to get through. That's not their practice, that's not their experience. So there's a change, and you have to manage these expectations. The miners themselves, you have to confirm the tenure so that, and the government of Uganda has just changed tenure, so everyone is having to reapply. Each group is organized differently. Each group has different skill sets, and they are all in different neighborhoods. Geologically, some are more, have only very few farmers around them, others are right in a major city or major town. So every time you go to a region, you're dealing with something different that you have to work your way through. There are different practices in every country. Laws and structure, thankfully Uganda uses British common law. Cultural practices, functions that, events that, or what you think should be normal is actually really difficult. Traffic is so bad in Kampala that unless you organize everyone to come to you, you can only make 3 meetings in a day. You just have to realize that you can only make 3 meetings in a day. And you're not going to get everyone to come to you, so that's what's going to happen. It can take 2 hours to go 3 miles, and it can take 10 minutes. You don't know which it'll be. So even those logistics are difficult. Governments have different practices, and in Uganda, the permitting practices is different. It's very fast, but you have to demonstrate you have your financing in hand before they give you the permit. Whereas here in the Western world, and especially in Canada and the US, we're accustomed to applying for your permit, getting your permit, and then going out and doing your capital raise. So this represents a challenge for us that we have to try and figure out. It actually that is one of our challenges, and we rank it our highest risk at the current time is our ability to raise the 7 to 8 million Canadian for production. That is our highest risk at the current time. The capital risks, and we have not solved these. The capital market's view of country risk and their view of Uganda, and they can look at the Freedom House Index, ease of doing business, and Uganda doesn't rank very high. Most of the countries that have this issue with artisanal gold mining do not rank high in terms of country risk. Securing the production capital. The production capital is an awkward size. We're not looking for $100 million or $200 million. We're also not looking for $500,000 or even $1 million, which we could probably achieve ourselves. So we're looking for 7 to 8 million Canadian. Now, if we raise a portion of that, we can do 1 plant. But it's an awkward size to raise for production capital in a country that's seen as high risk and a long way away, and a country people don't know a lot about. And there's also a lack, pardon the typo, of country diversification. Many countries, many companies that operate in Africa make a point of operating in 3 or 4 countries. If you operate in 3 or 4 countries, the bank is much happier with you because they see your risk as being of a single event risk or country event risk as being much lower. You still have 2 or 3 other operations that aren't affected. So we will not be able to get regular bank financing until we have operations in at least 2 countries and ongoing operations. So that means we will not be able to go to the bank to borrow capital for expansion. It'll all have to be done internally or a new equity raise. There are lots of technical risks. There are no drilling on these projects. The loss of the limited assays and precise location that, to which those assays might be attributed. Because these are smaller sized projects, it's hard to justify the technical costs for robust engineering studies. And are you going to have your recovery at 91% or 92.5% or so on? All of this means it's sort of approximato on geology, grade control, and metallurgy. Right? So you have to,
Over there.
approximato, is, by the way, is a Rob Cook expression. He's in a choir, and he was always next to someone who couldn't quite hit the note properly, and he said his friend sang approximato. Western expectations of data, therefore, when we go to raise capital, can't be met. So that represents a challenge. And long-term developing local skill sets, that is absolutely a challenge that we face, technically. Tailings issues when we get there. Who owns the tailings? Mercury contamination, cyanomercuric contamination, education, because you're going to have to educate a whole bunch of people within the government and in the community. And you're going to have to get government environmental approval, and you're not going to be able to get all of the mercury or cyanomercuric compounds out. It'll take a lot of research in advance, and you'll have to get a deal with the government that better is good enough. Is it going to be 90%, 95% of the mercury and cyanomercuric compounds you remove? 60 wouldn't be good enough because you're disturbing these tailings and probably remobilizing things. So there are a lot of issues to go to the tailings, and that's why for us it's deprioritized. Huge economic potential, and one of the leaders from MUMA has actually gone ahead. He has a lot of foresight, and he's tied up, acquired the rights to a large number of piles of tailings, knowing that in 5 to 10 years we hope to be able to deal with that issue. But that is a serious issue, set of issues. Securing senior personnel. We do not yet have someone who can run the operation. We probably need 2 or 3 expats. And the size at this point isn't so big. Relative to their skill set, these people are generally accustomed to running bigger operations. They could be forgiven for having a country aversion, a concern about the country. Now, Uganda, on a personal level, is very safe. In fact, if someone tries to steal your wallet and you yell thief, the biggest problem is that the police will arrive eventually. Their challenge will be stopping the crowd from lynching the thief. So the community, but unless you know that and you've been there, you don't feel that. There's an aversion to a startup. Let's be frank, in tech companies, bright people will go into a startup and not expect to get paid. But if you've got a skilled, experienced mining or mill operation person, they have a legitimate concern about agreeing to come on board. And a whole range of, you're managing a whole different set of issues than these people are accustomed to managing. So those are going to be the challenges that we face in securing senior personnel that we need. Future ownership. What does future ownership look like? Because there's going to have to be a transition. Some of the larger ASGM associations, MUMA being one of them, are already thinking, could we convert to being a public junior mineral exploration and development company? They're already thinking about that. They don't know what that looks like. And because our special purpose vehicle, our joint venture agreement, means we own the production assets, they own the mining, or they own the production assets, we own the processing. And those are separate because they don't want us, we will not compete with the artisanals on ownership of land. The moment we own any land, artisanals will be afraid that that's what our intent is to own their land, own their gold, right? So then how does that proceed if they want to expand? They're thinking about that. How do we vest local employees of Curatio Gold? One of the challenges with employee share ownership in the developing world is that while CapEx for a project is a little smaller than in our world, salaries are a fraction. And if you want someone to take $50 a month off their paycheck to buy shares, and that would only be $500 a year or so, administratively, that seems kind of crazy. It's meaningless on your capital side. And yet, $40 or $50 to buy shares in something, this is something they don't do, they're not accustomed to, they don't have a culture of it. And we forget how long it took, for instance, at Dofasco to get all the employees at Dofasco in Canada to decide to agree to participate in the share purchase program that the company would match. The banks in Canada had the same issue. So how do we end up vesting local employees with some of the ownership? That is a conundrum, and ownership is very different from profit sharing. As those of us who fly WestJet know, ever since WestJet became privately owned and the employees no longer own shares, we know how the service quality has gone down, right? So there's a big difference when an employee takes money off their paycheck to buy shares. So how are we going to wrestle with this issue of future ownership? And as it grows larger and in the long term, we will be more vulnerable if locals don't own an interest in our processing facility. That has to become part of our vaccination against what we call undue financial pressure. So how are we going to meet that challenge? And we haven't solved that yet. And then, of course, the more traditional additional risks: health, everything from dengue and malaria, and the health. If you have a health issue and a normal part of your human life health issue, getting treatment in the country and then getting home. Traffic, you must never drive, because if there's an accident, you're at fault, right? You're the foreigner. And by the way, it's not about skin color, it's about being a foreigner. My friend Femi in South Sudan had an car accident, plainly not his fault, and he was in trouble, right? So it's not about skin color, it's about the fact that you're from away, you're not a local, and you've had an accident. But not all the vehicles are well serviced. So even if you have your own driver with a recognized competent firm that services their vehicles, there are many vehicles on the road that are not well serviced. A truck can blow a tire right beside you, right? All sorts of bad things can happen. We view that as the second biggest risk to us at the moment, to Doug, when he's in country. We're using a driver, but an accident on the road, and a risk assessment professional has told us that is the second biggest risk. Health is number one. Doug is a registered biologist. He takes his Malnerone. He knows about mosquitoes. He knows about not eating the unwashed cabbage, etc. But health number one, traffic number two. As we develop, there will be issues that arise of corruption. The saying about Uganda is that if you're patient, you don't have to pay the bribe. So there was one case where it took us 5 months to get bulk samples, a permit to export bulk samples to South Africa. So we were patient, and then eventually the Bank of Uganda heard what was happening, and the government department, and the problem was solved in 3 days. So you can't go every time there's something, but you have to do that. Organized crime, absolutely an issue, and it's abetted by a very methodical foreign entity which actually has a unit in their army that specializes in penetrating the laptops and the information of all Western business people. They track you, and at the opportune time, they pass that information to the local organized crime. That's a very hard one to combat. I am convinced that this entity already knows all of Doug's movements, his behavior patterns, his practices. So that, and how do you solve that? Well, and you can't afford at our level to pay for someone, right? The cost of full security is pretty high. And then just general unorganized crime. So those are also additional risks. That's going to be a very significant piece on our bottom line. So my comment is, hey, mister, can you spare $1 million? So, because we need to find, our biggest risk right now is finding the capital. We need to find someone who will write a $2.5 million check, because that'll get us with one project